The sun hung low over a dusty country road in upstate New York, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt and barren trees that leaned like weary sentinels. Amara Lily Collins, barely 14, walked with her faded backpack swaying, its frayed straps a testament to years of use. Her curly hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her school uniform, once white, now carried the soft gray of too many washes. She moved with quiet purpose, her sneakers crunching gravel, each step a small defiance against the world's indifference. In her pocket, a ruby ring, too large for her slender finger, pressed against her thigh, a gift from her late mother, Sarah, its weight both comfort and mystery. Ahead, a sleek black Mustang GT sat stalled, its hood propped open, a faint wisp of steam curling into the golden air. A man in a tailored Italian suit paced beside it, his polished shoes gleaming unnaturally against the gritty road. Christopher Reynolds, known to Manhattan's elite as Chris, barked into his phone, his voice sharp with irritation. "I don't care about the board meeting. I'm stuck on County Road 16 with a dead car, and no mechanic will come for hours. Fix it." He hung up, his face a mask of controlled fury, and glared at the engine as if it might bend to his will. Amara paused, her dark eyes scanning the car. She recognized the model, a twin-turbo Mustang GT, prone to cooling system failures if mishandled. The sweet, acrid scent of glycol lingered, confirming her suspicion. She adjusted her backpack, her small toolkit clinking inside, a gift from her Uncle Matthew, the only family she had left. His words echoed in her mind, "If you can fix it, don't wait for permission." She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Sir, your car's leaking coolant. I can take a look if you want." Chris turned, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her, a black schoolgirl, small and unremarkable, her uniform wrinkled, her sneakers worn. The world he knew, of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, had no place for her. "This is a high-end car, kid," he said, his tone dismissive but not cruel. "Not something you'd understand. Go home." A passing truck slowed, its driver glancing at the scene, his smirk a silent agreement with Chris's judgment. Amara felt the sting, the familiar weight of being unseen, but her face remained calm. She opened her backpack, pulling out her toolkit, her movements deliberate. "I know cars," she said simply, kneeling beside the Mustang. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, tracing the radiator hose, finding the leak. Chris watched, his skepticism faltering as she worked, her hands steady despite the dust and heat. The road was silent now, save for the soft creak of cooling metal and the distant hum of cicadas. A breeze stirred, catching a glint of red on her finger, the ruby ring, its deep glow catching the fading light. Chris froze, his breath catching. That ring. He knew it, though he couldn't place why. A memory, long buried, stirred in his chest, sharp and unyielding. Amara stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. "It's patched for now. You can drive to town, but get it fixed properly." She met his gaze, unafraid, her eyes holding a quiet strength that unsettled him. Chris, who commanded boardrooms with a glance, felt exposed. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer, almost reverent. "Amara Collins," she replied, offering a small smile. "And you?" "Chris Reynolds," he said, hesitating. He extended his hand, and as they shook, the ring gleamed again, its red stone casting a fleeting glow across his face. His heart thudded. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise, one he'd made as a boy, one he'd broken. He swallowed, his voice low. "That ring, where did you get it?" Amara's smile faded, her fingers brushing the stone. "It was my mother's. She said it was a promise from someone special. She died last year." Her words were soft, but they landed like a blow. Chris's mind raced, fragments of a past he tried to forget, Sunshine Children's Home, a little girl named Lily, a vow he'd abandoned, colliding with the present. He opened his mouth to speak, but a car horn blared in the distance, shattering the moment. Amara stepped back, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I should go. Good luck with your car. She turned, her figure small against the vast, sunlit road, but her presence lingered, heavy and undeniable. Chris stood rooted, the Mustang's engine now silent, the world around him too quiet. He touched his wrist, where a faint scar from his youth hid beneath his cuff, a mark from the day he'd given that ring away. The truck driver from earlier circled back, slowing to shout, "You let a kid touch your car, man. Hope she didn't break it." His laughter grated, but Chris didn't respond. His eyes followed Amara, her silhouette fading into the golden haze. The ring, the girl, the road, they weren't random. They were a reckoning, pulling him back to a truth he'd buried under skyscrapers and wealth. As Amara disappeared around a bend, Chris climbed into the Mustang, his hands gripping the wheel. The engine hummed to life, but his thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in a promise he'd made 15 years ago, in a place he'd sworn never to revisit. He drove toward town, the ruby's glow burned into his memory, a beacon of something he couldn't yet name. But no one knew, not the truck driver, not the boardroom waiting in Manhattan, that Chris Reynolds wasn't just a millionaire. He was a man carrying a secret that could unravel an empire. The Mustang's engine purred as Chris Reynolds drove toward town, the dusty road fading in his rearview mirror, but Amara's face lingered in his mind, her ruby ring a spark that refused to dim. The golden light of late afternoon bathed the upstate New York countryside, painting the barren trees and sagging fences in hues of amber and rust. Yet the warmth couldn't touch the chill settling in his chest, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. His polished hands tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking under his grip. That ring. That girl. They were threads of a past he'd spent 15 years burying, now unraveling with every mile. He glanced at his wrist, where a faint scar peeked from beneath his cuff, a jagged line from a reckless day at Sunshine Children's Home, when he was just 19, defiant and full of fire. The memory came unbidden, a playground dusted with gravel, the laughter of children, and a small girl with sorrowful eyes clutching his hand. Lily. He'd given her the ruby ring, stolen from his mother's jewelry box, a reckless vow to return for her. "When you see this ring, you'll know it's me," he promised, his voice fierce with the certainty of youth. But he hadn't returned. The orphanage closed, the land sold, and his father, Richard Reynolds, had built an empire on its ruins. Chris had let it all fade, drowning the guilt in boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. The road curved, and a faded billboard loomed, a relic advertising a long-gone diner, its paint peeling like old skin. The sight jolted him, pulling another memory loose. He'd driven this road before, as a teenager, his mother Olivia beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. They'd visited Sunshine for charity events, photo ops for the Reynolds name. But Olivia's eyes had always lingered on the children, her smile strained. Once, she'd whispered, "These kids deserve more than our pity," her voice breaking. Chris had shrugged it off, too young to understand. Now, the weight of her words pressed against him, heavy as the ring's red glow in his mind. He slowed the car, pulling onto the shoulder, the engine's hum falling silent. The world outside was still, save for the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the road. Chris leaned back, closing his eyes, and let the past flood in. Sunshine Children's Home hadn't just been an orphanage. It was a place of secrets, whispered deals, and files his father kept locked away. Chris had glimpsed one once, at 16, sneaking into Richard's office, a document marked LS-15, special case, no trace. He'd thought it was business, another of his father's ruthless maneuvers. But Lily's name had been there, circled in red, and he'd never asked why. The scar on his wrist burned now, a reminder of his silence. A distant church bell tolled, its mournful chime cutting through the haze. Chris opened his eyes, his gaze falling on the passenger seat, where his phone lay, its screen dark. He imagined calling his mother, asking about Lily, about the ring. But Olivia had grown quiet over the years, her warmth dimmed by Richard's shadow. Chris hadn't pushed, hadn't wanted to know. He'd built his life on looking away, away from the children at Sunshine, away from the promises he'd broken, away from the man he'd become. A man who dismissed a schoolgirl on a dusty road, only to be undone by her steady hands and a ring he couldn't forget. The memory shifted, sharper now. He saw himself at 20, standing in his father's office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the glass. Richard had handed him a file, his voice cold. "Sunshine's gone. The land's ours. Don't ask questions." Chris had nodded, eager to prove himself, to step into the Reynolds legacy. But that night, he'd dreamed of Lily, her small hand slipping from his, her eyes accusing. He'd woken in a sweat, the ruby ring's glow haunting him even then. He'd told himself it was nothing, that she was gone, that the past didn't matter. Yet here it was, staring him down through Amara's calm, unflinching gaze. A truck rumbled past, its horn jarring him back to the present. Chris's hands trembled as he restarted the car, the engine's roar a poor shield against the memories clawing at him. He thought of Amara, her quiet resilience, her worn uniform, her toolkit wrapped in cloth. She was no ordinary girl, just as Lily hadn't been. The ring tied them together, a thread across time, but to what? A promise? A secret? Or something darker, something his father had buried with the orphanage? Chris's throat tightened. He'd spent his life running from questions, but Amara's presence demanded answers. The road stretched on, leading to the small town where Amara had directed him. Neon signs flickered in the distance, promising gas stations and diners, but Chris saw only the ruby ring, its glow a beacon in his mind. He remembered his mother's face at sunshine, the way she'd knelt to tie a child's shoe, her hands gentle but trembling. She'd known something, hadn't she? Something she'd never shared, something that had silenced her. Chris's jaw clenched. He'd been complicit, too, in that silence, building skyscrapers on land stained with secrets. As the town's lights grew closer, Chris's phone buzzed, his mother's name flashing on the screen. He stared at it, his heart pounding. The bell's chime echoed in his ears, a call to reckoning. He could answer, could ask about Lily, about the ring, about Amara. Or he could keep driving, let the past stay buried, let Amara fade like Lily had. But the ring's glow wouldn't let him. It was more than a memory, it was evidence, a key to a truth he'd spent his life avoiding. He pulled into a diner's gravel lot, the phone still buzzing in his hand. The neon sign above flickered, casting red light across the Mustang's hood, a cruel mimicry of the ruby's glow. Chris's scar itched, his chest tight with the weight of 15 years. Amara had fixed his car, but she'd broken something else, his carefully built walls, his certainty that the past was gone. He lifted the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. The call went to voicemail, but the silence that followed was louder than any words. Amara's ring wasn't just a relic. It was a warning, and Chris knew he couldn't outrun it any longer. The diner's neon sign buzzed, its red glow flickering across the Mustang's hood like a heartbeat, pulling Chris Reynolds deeper into the spiral of his thoughts. He sat in the gravel lot, the engine off, the world beyond the windshield a blur of small-town lights and passing shadows. His phone lay silent now, his mother's missed call a weight in his pocket, but Amara's ruby ring burned in his memory, its deep red stone a flare from a past he couldn't escape. He stepped out, the cool night air sharp against his face, and pushed through the diner's glass door, the bell above jingling like a faint echo of the church chime that had haunted him earlier. Inside, the diner was a time capsule, checkered floors, vinyl booths, the scent of coffee and fried onions thick in the air. A jukebox hummed a soft country tune, its notes weaving through the clink of dishes and low murmurs of locals. Chris slid into a corner booth, his Italian suit out of place among flannel shirts and worn jeans. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a name tag reading, Doris, set a chipped mug of coffee before him. "You look like you're carrying the world, mister," she said, her voice warm but probing. Chris forced a smile, his fingers brushing the scar on his wrist, hidden beneath his cuff. He didn't answer, but her gaze lingered, as if she saw something he couldn't. Across the room, a teenage boy in a faded hoodie sat at the counter, his dark skin catching the light as he spun a spoon between his fingers. He was no older than Amara, his eyes sharp and restless, darting toward Chris with a curiosity that felt too deliberate. The boy's sneakers tapped the floor, a rhythm that matched the jukebox's slow beat, and on his wrist, a thin leather bracelet glinted, etched with a faint design, a vine, curling like the one on Amara's ruby ring. Chris's breath hitched. It was subtle, almost nothing, but the coincidence gnawed at him, a thread of recognition he couldn't place. He sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding him, and let his mind drift back to Amara. Her steady hands on the Mustang, her calm defiance against his dismissal, the ring that shouldn't have been hers. The memory of Sunshine Children's home crept in again, a summer day, the playground's gravel hot under his feet, Lily's small hand in his. He'd carved that vine into the ring's band himself, a reckless act of rebellion against his father's cold control. "It's ours," he'd told Lily, grinning, "a secret just for us." But the secret had vanished when Sunshine closed, and with it, Lily. Or so he'd thought. The jukebox skipped, the song stuttering, and the boy at the counter glanced up, his eyes locking with Chris's for a fleeting moment. There was something in that look, not accusation, not fear, but a question, as if the boy knew more than he should. Chris's scar itched, the diner's warmth suddenly stifling. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to his mother's contact, but hesitated. What would he even ask? About a ring? A girl? A place his family had erased? The boy stood, tossing $1 on the counter, and as he passed Chris's booth, he paused, his voice low. "You're not from here, are you?" Chris looked up, startled. "No. Just passing through." The boy nodded, his bracelet catching the light again. "Careful on these roads. Things have a way of finding you." He walked out, the bell jingling behind him, leaving Chris with a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Doris approached, refilling his coffee. "That's Zeke," she said, her tone fond but guarded. "Good kid, but he's got eyes like he's seen too much. Always fiddling with that bracelet. Says it's from his mom, before she passed." Chris's hand tightened around the mug. "His mom?" "Sarah Collins," Doris said, wiping the counter. "Died last year. Left him and his cousin Amara with their uncle. Tough life, but they're tough kids." The name hit Chris like a punch, Sarah Collins, Amara's mother, the woman who'd given her the ring. He forced his voice steady. "Amara, the girl who fixes cars?" Doris's eyes narrowed, appraising him. "You know her?" "Met her today," Chris said, his heart racing. "She helped with my car." Doris nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "That's Amara. Got her uncle's hands and her mom's heart. But that ring she wears, it's got a story she don't talk about." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Sarah used to work at a place called Sunshine, back in the day. Never said much, but she carried a weight, like she was running from something." Chris's scar burned now, the vine on Zeke's bracelet and Amara's ring weaving together in his mind. Sunshine. Sarah. Lily. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit, not yet. He paid for the coffee, his movements mechanical, and stepped back into the night. The diner's glow faded behind him, the road stretching dark and endless. He climbed into the Mustang, but didn't start it. Instead, he pulled up a photo on his phone, an old Polaroid, creased and faded, of him and Lily at Sunshine, her small hand clutching the ruby ring. He'd kept it all these years, hidden in his wallet, a quiet penance. The bracelet, the ring, the name Sarah Collins, they were no coincidence. Chris's chest tightened, the weight of 15 years pressing down. He thought of Zeke's eyes, too old for a boy his age, and Amara's quiet strength. They were tied to Sunshine, to his family, to a secret his father had buried. The Mustang's keys dangled in his hand, but he didn't turn them. Instead, he stared at the Polaroid, Lily's face blurring as his vision swam. The boy's words echoed, "Things have a way of finding you." He looked up, the road empty, but the darkness felt alive, watching. Amara wasn't just a girl who fixed his car. Zeke wasn't just a kid in a diner. They were echoes of a promise he'd broken, and the ruby ring was calling him back to a truth he wasn't ready to face. But as the night closed in, Chris knew one thing: the past wasn't done with him, and it was coming for him whether he drove away or not. The night air clung to Chris Reynolds as he stood beside the Mustang, the diner's neon glow fading into the distance, its hum replaced by the restless chirp of crickets. The upstate New York sky stretched wide, stars piercing the dark like accusations, and the ruby ring's image burned in his mind, its vine-carved band a tether to a past he couldn't outrun. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against his tailored suit, and gripped the wheel, his scar itching beneath his cuff. Zeke's bracelet, Amara's ring, Sarah Collins's name, they wove a net around him, each thread pulling tighter. He started the engine, the roar of fleeting shield against the questions clawing at him, and drove toward the town's heart, where answers might hide. The road wound through sleepy streets, past clapboard houses and a gas station flickering under a single bulb. Chris's phone buzzed again, his mother's name flashing, but he silenced it, his jaw tight. Olivia's voice would only complicate things, stirring memories of her strange smiles at Sunshine Children's Home, her hands trembling as she'd whispered about the children. He didn't need her words now, he needed facts, something to explain why a schoolgirl wore a ring he'd given away 15 years ago, why a boy named Zeke carried its echo on his wrist. The Mustang slowed as he reached a small mechanic's shop, its sign reading, "Collins Auto Repair," in chipped red paint. Amara's uncle. The man who'd taught her to fix cars, who'd raised her after Sarah's death. Chris parked, the gravel crunching under his tires, and stepped out, his polished shoes absurd against the oil-stained lot. The shop was dark, its garage door half open, revealing the glint of tools and a rusted pickup inside. A single light glowed from a window above, where a shadow moved, someone awake, someone who might know more than Amara had let on. He hesitated, the weight of his wealth and name useless here, then knocked on the side door, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Footsteps shuffled, and the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 50s, his hands stained with grease, his eyes wary but kind. Uncle Matthew Collins. "You're the guy with the Mustang," Matthew said, his voice low, recognizing Chris from Amara's description. "What do you want at this hour?" His flannel shirt was rumpled, his face lined with years of labor and loss, but there was a steadiness in his gaze that reminded Chris of Amara. The air between them was thick, charged with unspoken questions. Chris straightened, forcing calm into his voice. "I need to talk about Amara. About her ring." Matthew's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "You don't know her. Why's her ring your business?" The question hung, sharp and protective, but Chris caught a flicker of something else, fear, or recognition. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I gave that ring to a girl named Lily, 15 years ago, at Sunshine Children's Home. Now Amara's wearing it. I need to know how." The name, Sunshine, hit Matthew like a blow, his face paling in the dim light. He stepped back, gesturing Chris inside, his movements reluctant but resigned. The shop's interior smelled of oil and metal, tools scattered on a workbench, a faded photo of a woman, Sarah, Chris guessed, pinned to the wall. Matthew sank into a chair, his hands clasped, and studied Chris, the silence stretching until it felt like a third presence in the room. "You're a Reynolds," he said finally, the name a quiet accusation. "I know your family. Built towers on land that used to be a home for kids like Amara." Chris's throat tightened, the weight of his father's legacy pressing down. "I was a kid myself back then," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know what my father did. But that ring, it's mine. I gave it to Lily, and now Amara has it. Why?" Matthew's gaze flicked to the photo of Sarah, then back to Chris, his expression unreadable. Sarah worked at Sunshine, he said slowly. She was a nurse. Took Amara in when she was a baby, raised her as her own. That ring came with her, from her real mother, she said. That's all I know. The words landed heavily, each one a piece of a puzzle Chris couldn't yet solve. Her real mother, he pressed, leaning forward. Who was she? Matthew's jaw clenched, his hands flexing as if wrestling with a truth too dangerous to share. Sarah never said. Only that the ring was a promise, and Amara was meant to keep it safe. He paused, his eyes searching Chris's face. But you're not just here about a ring, are you? You're scared. I can see it. Chris flinched, the truth of it stinging. He was scared, of what the ring meant, of what his father had done, of the girl who'd fixed his car and upended his world. He pulled the Polaroid from his wallet, its edges worn, and slid it across the table. Matthew's breath caught as he saw it. Chris, young and grinning, holding a little girl's hand, the ruby ring glinting on her finger. That's Lily, Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is Amara, is she her? Matthew's hands trembled as he touched the photo, his eyes glistening. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. Sarah took secrets to her grave. But Amara's got that same fire, that same heart. He looked up, his gaze piercing. If you're here to dig up the past, you better be ready for what you find. Your family doesn't let go easy. The warning hung in the air, cold and heavy, as a faint click sounded from the ring on Chris's finger, a nervous habit, twisting a band he rarely wore. Matthew's eyes snapped to it, and Chris froze, realizing his mistake. The ring was plain silver, but its band bore a faint vine, a match to Amara's ruby, a relic from his mother's collection. Matthew stood, his voice low and urgent. Where'd you get that? Chris's heart pounded, the shop's walls closing in. He'd come for answers, but now the questions were multiplying, and the vine's curl was pulling him deeper into a truth he wasn't prepared to face. The dim light of the mechanic's shop flickered, casting jagged shadows across the oil-stained workbench where Matthew Collins stood, his eyes locked on the silver ring on Chris Reynolds's finger. The vine-carved band glinted faintly, a twin to the ruby ring Amara wore, and the air between them crackled with unspoken truths. Chris's heart thundered, his tailored suit suddenly too tight, the weight of Matthew's gaze pinning him like a confession he wasn't ready to make. He'd come to this small-town garage seeking answers about Amara, about Lily, about a past he'd buried under skyscrapers and wealth. But now, the ring on his own hand, a forgotten keepsake from his mother, had turned the hunter into the hunted. Where'd you get that? Matthew repeated, his voice low, a tremor of suspicion and grief threading through it. His hands, rough from years of wrench turning, clenched at his sides, as if bracing for a blow. Chris opened his mouth, but no words came. The Polaroid of him and Lily lay on the table, its faded edges a silent witness to the promise he'd broken 15 years ago at Sunshine Children's Home. He slid the silver ring off, holding it up, its delicate vine pattern catching the light. It was my mother's, he said finally, his voice hoarse. She gave it to me years ago. I didn't know it mattered. Matthew's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, his breath uneven. Didn't know it mattered? He gestured to the photo of Sarah on the wall, her gentle smile frozen in time. That ring, the one Amara wears, came from her mother, her real mother, not Sarah. Sarah said it was a promise, a secret she died protecting. And now you're standing here, wearing its match, talking about Sunshine like it's just a memory. His voice broke, and he turned away, rubbing a hand over his face. You Reynolds folks built an empire on secrets, and my sister paid the price. Chris's scar burned beneath his cuff, the vine's curl tying him to Amara, to Lily, to a truth he'd spent his life avoiding. He set the silver ring on the table, its soft clink echoing in the quiet shop. Tell me, he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. What did Sarah know? What was she protecting Amara from? Matthew hesitated, his gaze flicking to the photo, then back to Chris. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of a decade's loss, until he sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. Sarah was a nurse at Sunshine, he began, his voice low, each word deliberate. She loved those kids, treated them like her own. But she saw things, files marked special case, kids moved in the night, no records, no questions. She started asking, digging, and that's when she found Amara. A baby, barely a year old, with no name, no parents, just a ruby ring tucked in her blanket. Sarah took her, left Sunshine, and never looked back. She said the ring was a key, that it held a truth too dangerous to speak. Chris's chest tightened, the pieces falling into place with a sickening clarity. A key, he whispered, his mind racing to the ruby ring, its oversized band on Amara's small finger. He saw her again, kneeling by the Mustang, her steady hands patching the leak, her eyes unflinching. What truth? He pressed, leaning forward. Matthew's gaze hardened, and he reached into a drawer, pulling out a small leather journal, its pages worn and yellowed. He opened it, revealing Sarah's slanted handwriting, and slid it across the table. "Read it," Matthew said, his voice thick. "But you won't like what you find." Chris's hands trembled as he took the journal, the paper cool against his fingers. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into a confession that stole his breath. They called it Project Gemini, Sarah had written. A plan to breed perfect heirs, to control bloodlines. The Reynolds family ran it, hid it behind Sunshine's walls. Amara was one of them, a child they meant to mold, to use. The ring holds proof, a microfilm, locked inside. I took her to save her, but they'll never stop looking. The final line, scrawled in haste, chilled him, if they find her, they'll erase her, like they erased Lily. Chris's vision swam, the name, Lily, a knife to his heart. He saw her again, 5 years old, clutching the ruby ring he'd given her, her eyes trusting. He'd promised to come back, but Sunshine had closed, and his father, Richard Reynolds, had built a commercial empire on its ruins. Chris's voice shook as he looked up. "Amara, is she Lily?" Matthew's eyes glistened, but he didn't answer, only pointed to the journal. "Keep reading." The next page was a sketch, a ruby ring, its band split open, revealing a tiny compartment. Below it, Sarah's words, the microfilm names them all. Lily. Elizabeth. A third, still hidden. Richard's children, stolen for his legacy. Chris's blood ran cold. Children. Plural. His father hadn't just taken Lily. There were others, siblings he'd never known, tied to a conspiracy woven through his family's wealth. The silver ring on the table seemed to pulse, its vine a silent accusation. He was part of this, complicit in his silence, his ignorance. Matthew stood, his voice raw. Sarah died keeping that secret. She said the ring would find its way back, that it always does. And now you're here, wearing its twin, asking questions like you're not one of them. He leaned closer, his eyes searching Chris's face. Are you here to help her, or to bury her like your father would? Chris's scar burned, the journal's weight crushing him. He saw Amara's face, her quiet strength, her hands on the Mustang, fixing what he couldn't. She wasn't just Lily, she was proof of a crime, a living key to a truth that could topple his father's empire. And he, Chris Reynolds, was no longer just a millionaire. He was a brother, a betrayer, a man standing at the edge of a secret that could destroy everything he'd known. The shop's light flickered again, and outside, a shadow moved past the window, too quick to catch, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the certainty that someone, somewhere, was watching. The shadow outside the mechanic's shop vanished into the night, but its echo lingered, a shiver down Chris Reynolds' spine as he clutched Sarah's journal, its pages heavy with truths he couldn't unlearn. The dim bulb above flickered, casting jagged light across Matthew Collins's face, his eyes still fixed on Chris, demanding an answer. The silver ring on the table glinted, its vine pattern a silent bridge between Amara's ruby and a past Chris had helped bury. His tailored suit felt like a costume now, his wealth a fragile shield against the weight of Sarah's words, Lily. Elizabeth. A third, still hidden. His father's children, stolen for a legacy built on lies. Chris's scar burned, a reminder of the boy who'd promised to protect Lily, and the man who'd let her vanish. Matthew's voice cut through the silence, softer now, but no less piercing. You didn't know, did you? He leaned back, his grease-stained hands trembling slightly, as if the truth had shaken him as much as it had Chris. All these years, I thought you Reynolds folks were just cold, calculating. But you're as lost as the rest of us. His words weren't absolution, they were a mirror, reflecting Chris's complicity, his years of turning away from sunshine's shadows. Chris's throat tightened, the journal's sketch of the ruby ring blurring before him. A microfilm, hidden inside, naming his siblings, exposing his father's crimes. Amara wasn't just a girl who'd fixed his car, she was his sister, a key to a conspiracy he'd inherited. He set the journal down, his hands unsteady, and met Matthew's gaze. I didn't know, he said, his voice raw, each word a confession. I was 19, angry, stupid. I gave Lily that ring, swore I'd come back. But my father, he closed Sunshine, took the land, and I let it go. I let her go. The admission hung in the air, heavy as the oil-scented air of the shop. Matthew's expression softened, not with forgiveness, but with recognition, a shared grief for the children lost to Richard Reynolds's ambition. He reached for the photo of Sarah on the wall, his fingers brushing her face. Sarah tried to save her. She paid with her life. Chris's chest ached, the weight of Sarah's sacrifice pressing down. He saw Amara again, kneeling by the Mustang, her steady hands and unflinching eyes. She'd inherited Sarah's heart, Lily's fire, and now she carried a secret that could destroy an empire, or her. I'm not my father, Chris said, his voice firmer now, though it trembled with the effort. I want to help her. Tell me how. Matthew studied him, his wary gaze searching for deceit, but finding something else, guilt, raw and unguarded. He nodded slowly, a gesture as much for himself as for Chris. Then you start by keeping her safe. If that microfilm's real, they'll come for her. The word "they" sent a chill through Chris, the shadow outside the window flashing in his mind. His father's reach was long, his empire built on silenced voices and buried truths. He stood, slipping the silver ring back on, its weight a vow he couldn't break again. I need to see her, he said. I need to know if she's Lily. Matthew hesitated, then pulled a business card from his pocket, scribbling an address on the back. She's at home, with Zeke. But you go careful. She's not just a kid, she's a fighter, and she don't trust easy. Chris took the card, the address a small apartment complex on the town's edge. As he stepped toward the door, Matthew's hand caught his arm, gentle but firm. You broke a promise once, he said, his voice low, his eyes glistening. Don't break this one. The words landed like a stone, and Chris nodded, the shop's light dimming as he stepped into the night. The gravel crunched under his shoes, the Mustang waiting like a silent partner in his reckoning. He drove, the town's lights blurring, Amara's face and Lily's merging in his mind, their eyes accusing, trusting, hoping. The apartment complex was a squat, weathered building, its paint peeling under the glow of a single street lamp. Chris parked, his heart pounding, and climbed the stairs to Amara's door, the card crumpled in his hand. He knocked, the sound soft but deliberate, and the door opened to reveal Zeke, the boy from the diner, his hoodie pulled low, his vine-etched bracelet catching the light. You again, Zeke said, his voice wary, but his eyes flickered with recognition, as if he'd expected this moment. Amara's inside. She appeared behind him, her curly hair loose now, her faded uniform replaced by a worn sweater. The ruby ring gleamed on her finger, its red stone ascended to the heavens. She froze, her eyes narrowing as she saw Chris, her hand tightening on the doorframe. What are you doing here, she asked, her voice steady but guarded. Chris's voice caught, the weight of the journal, the microfilm, the truth pressing down. "I know about the ring," he said, his voice soft, almost breaking. "I know it's more than a promise. And I think you're my sister." Amara's face hardened, but her eyes flickered with something: fear, hope, defiance. Zeke stepped closer, protective, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "You don't know me," she said, but her voice wavered, the ring glinting as she moved. "Why should I trust you?" Chris's scar burned, his hand brushing the silver ring on his finger, a gesture of forgiveness to himself, to her. "Because I made a promise once," he said, his voice trembling, "and I broke it. I won't break it again." Amara's gaze softened, just for a moment, and in that silence, the weight of their shared past hung like a fragile thread, ready to snap or hold. But outside, a car's engine growled in the distance, its headlights sweeping the lot, and Chris knew the shadow from the shop wasn't gone, it was closing in. The distant growl of the car engine faded into the night, but its echo lingered, a pulse of danger that quickened Chris Reynolds' breath as he stood in the doorway of Amara's small apartment. The street lamp's glow cast long shadows across the peeling paint of the complex, and the ruby ring on Amara's finger gleamed like a warning, its vine-carved band tying her to a past Chris had only begun to unravel. Her eyes, sharp and guarded, held his, searching for truth in his words, "I think you're my sister." Zeke stood beside her, his young face taut with suspicion, his vine-etched bracelet a quiet echo of the ring's design. The air was thick, charged with the weight of secrets and the fragile hope of connection. Amara's hand loosened on the doorframe, her sweater sleeve slipping to reveal the ruby's deep red glow. "You don't get to walk in here and call me family," she said, her voice low but steady, each word a shield against the vulnerability flickering in her eyes. "You're a Reynolds. Your name's on every building that pushed people like me out." Her words stung, a truth Chris couldn't deny, but he saw the tremor in her fingers, the way she touched the ring as if it anchored her. He stepped closer, his voice soft, deliberate. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Amara. I'm here because I owe you. Because I failed you once." Zeke's eyes darted between them, his hand hovering near Amara's, protective but silent. She glanced at him, a wordless exchange passing between them, then back at Chris. "Failed me?" she asked, her voice softer now, curiosity breaking through her defenses. "You don't even know me." Chris's scar burned beneath his cuff, the memory of Lily's trusting eyes merging with Amara's wary ones. He pulled the Polaroid from his pocket, its edges worn, and held it out. "This was taken 15 years ago, at Sunshine Children's Home. The girl I gave that ring to, her name was Lily. I think she's you." Amara took the photo, her breath catching as she saw the young Chris, grinning, holding a little girl's hand, the ruby ring glinting on her finger. Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition she couldn't name, and her fingers traced the image, lingering on the vine pattern. Zeke leaned closer, his bracelet catching the light, and whispered, "That's like Mom's ring." Amara's gaze snapped to Chris, her voice barely audible. "Mom. Sarah, she said this ring came from my real mother. She never told me who." The weight of her words settled over Chris, heavy as the journal's revelations in Matthew's shop, Project Gemini, stolen children, a microfilm hidden in the ring. He knelt to her level, his voice gentle but urgent. "I don't have all the answers, but I know you're not alone. That ring, it's proof of something bigger, something my father tried to bury. Let me help you find the truth." Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away, her strength a quiet fire that humbled him. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." "But Zeke stays." The apartment was small, its walls lined with faded photos and second-hand furniture, but it radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the cold glass of Chris's Manhattan penthouse. A worn couch sat under a window, a quilt draped over it, stitched with care. Amara gestured to it, and Chris sat, the Polaroid still in her hand. Zeke perched on a stool, his eyes never leaving Chris, but his posture softened, sensing the shift in Amara's resolve. She sank into a chair, the ring glinting as she spoke. Sarah used to say the ring would find its way home. I thought she meant me. But maybe it's you. Chris's throat tightened, the simplicity of her words cutting deeper than any boardroom deal. He saw Sarah's journal in his mind, her sketch of the ring's hidden compartment, the microfilm naming Lily, Elizabeth, and a third sibling. Amara wasn't just Lily, she was a sister he'd lost, a debt he could never repay. I don't deserve that, he said, his voice breaking. But I'm here now. And I'll keep you safe. Amara's eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled, a small, hesitant curve that felt like forgiveness, or at least its beginning. Zeke stood, his voice quiet but firm. You really think you can protect her? People like you, they don't come to places like this unless they want something. Chris met his gaze, seeing the boy's fear, his love for Amara, and nodded. I want her to be free. Free from my father's shadow, from whatever he's done. Zeke hesitated, then extended his hand, the bracelet glinting. For her, then. Not you. Chris shook it, the gesture sealing a fragile trust. Amara rose, crossing to a small table where a tin box sat, its lid dented but polished. She opened it, revealing a stack of letters, a locket, and a folded cloth. Sarah left these, she said, her voice steady. She said they'd matter one day. Maybe you can help me understand them. She handed him the locket, its surface etched with a vine, and Chris's heart skipped. It matched the rings, another piece of the puzzle, another tether to sunshine. As he opened it, a tiny photo inside showed a woman, young, with Amara's eyes, holding a baby. His mother, Olivia, had known her, he was sure. The room seemed to still, the weight of their shared past settling over them like dust. Amara's hand brushed his, a fleeting touch, and she whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The words were simple, but they broke something in Chris, a wall he'd built around his guilt. Outside, the street lamp flickered, and a car's shadow passed, too slow, too deliberate, a reminder that the truth they'd uncovered was aflame, and someone was already circling, ready to snuff it out. The flicker of the street lamp outside Amara's apartment cast fleeting shadows across the room, each one a whisper of the danger creeping closer, but inside, a fragile warmth held sway. Chris Reynolds sat on the worn couch, the locket Amara had given him cradled in his hands, its vine-etched surface cool against his skin. The tiny photo inside, a woman with Amara's eyes, holding a baby, stared back, a silent link to Sunshine Children's home and the secrets his father had buried. Amara sat across from him, her ruby ring glinting in the lamplight, her face a mix of hope and wariness. Zeke hovered nearby, his bracelet a quiet echo of the vine motif, his young eyes watching Chris with a trust that felt both earned and fragile. The air was heavy, not with fear, but with the weight of truths shared and promises remade. Chris's scar itched, a reminder of the boy who'd carved that vine into a ring for Lily, and the man who'd let her slip away. He looked at Amara, her small frame curled into the chair, and saw not just a sister, but a survivor, one who'd fixed his car, faced his dismissal, and now held the key to a conspiracy that could topple an empire. The locket's weight grounded him, its photo a question he couldn't yet answer. This woman, he said, his voice soft, she looks like someone my mother knew. Someone from Sunshine. Amara's eyes widened, her fingers brushing the ruby ring. Sarah never said who my real mother was. Only that she was gone, and the ring was all I had left. Zeke shifted, his voice low. Mom, Sarah, used to cry when she thought we weren't looking. Said she was keeping us safe from something big. He glanced at Amara, his expression softening. She'd be proud of you, letting him in. Amara's lips curved, a faint smile that carried Sarah's strength, and she nodded, her gaze returning to Chris. You said you'd help me find the truth. What happens now? The question hung, simple but vast, and Chris felt the weight of it, the chance to right a wrong he'd carried for 15 years. He leaned forward, the locket still in his hand, and met her eyes. "We find out what's in that ring," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Sarah's journal said it holds a microfilm, proof of what my father did. But we need to be careful. If he knows you're alive, if he knows about the ring," he trailed off, the shadow of the car outside flashing in his mind, its slow crawl a warning of his father's reach. Amara's face hardened, but her voice was calm. "I'm not afraid." Sarah wasn't, and she faced worse. Her words struck Chris, a quiet fire that humbled him. He saw his mother, Olivia, in his mind, her trembling hands at sunshine, her silence under Richard's shadow. He'd been complicit in that silence, building his life on it, but Amara's courage was a mirror, showing him a path he'd never dared take. He closed the locket, slipping it into his pocket, and stood, his suit rumpled but his resolve clear. "Then we do this together," he said. "But you need to trust me, and I need to earn it." Amara rose, crossing to the tin box on the table, her movements deliberate. She pulled out a folded letter, its edges yellowed, and handed it to Chris. "Sarah wrote this before she died. She said if someone came asking about the ring, I should give it to them. I think she meant you." Chris unfolded the letter, his hands trembling as Sarah's handwriting filled the page. "To the one who returns," it began, "the ring is more than a promise. It's a key to the truth, but truth comes at a cost. Protect her, as I couldn't." The words blurred, and Chris's chest ached, Sarah's sacrifice a weight he couldn't shake. He looked at Amara, her eyes steady, and Zeke, whose quiet presence anchored her. They were family, not by blood, but by choice, forged in hardship and love. Chris's voice softened, each word deliberate, as if speaking to Lily, to Amara, to himself. "Family isn't what you're born into," he said, his gaze holding hers. "It's who you choose to stand with, even when the world wants you to run." The words settled over the room, a truth distilled from years of guilt, a wisdom he'd learned too late but could now share. Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away, her hand closing around the ruby ring. "Sarah chose me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And I'm choosing this, whatever it is." Zeke stepped closer, his bracelet glinting, and nodded. "Me too. For Mom." The moment was small, a vow made in a cramped apartment, but it felt vast, a ripple that could shift the world. Chris's scar no longer burned, it warmed, a reminder of the boy who'd loved Lily, and the man who could still fight for her. He handed the letter back to Amara, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting connection that felt like a promise kept. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll find someone who can open that ring, see what's inside. But tonight, you rest. You've carried enough." Amara nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders, and Zeke guided her toward the couch, pulling the quilt over her. Chris stepped toward the door, the night waiting beyond, but Amara's voice stopped him. "Chris," she said, soft but clear, "thank you for not running." He turned, his throat tight, and nodded, the words sinking deep. As he stepped outside, the street lamp flickered again, and the car's shadow was gone, but its absence felt heavier, a predator retreating to strike later. Chris's hand closed around the locket in his pocket, Sarah's letter echoing in his mind, "Truth comes at a cost." He knew the cost now, his father's empire, his own legacy, perhaps his life. But as he glanced back at the apartment's glow, Amara's words anchored him, a light against the dark. The ring was a key, but the truth it held was a fire, and someone, somewhere, was already moving to extinguish it. The dawn broke over upstate New York, a soft pink light spilling across the dusty road where it all began, the barren trees now glowing with the promise of morning. Chris Reynolds drove the Mustang slowly, its engine a low hum, the weight of the night's revelation settling into his bones. Amara's apartment faded in the rearview mirror, but her words, "Thank you for not running," echoed in his heart, a lifeline against the guilt that had shadowed him for 15 years. In his pocket, Sarah's locket pressed against his chest, its vine-etched surface a twin to the ruby ring Amara wore, a silent vow to protect her. The road stretched toward the place where he'd first seen her, where she'd fixed his car and upended his world, and Chris knew he had to return, not to escape, but to release. The countryside was quiet, the decaying fences and gravel path bathed in a gentle glow that softened their edges. Chris parked near the spot where the Mustang had stalled, the memory vivid, Amara's steady hands, her unflinching eyes, the ruby ring glinting in the sun. He stepped out, the air cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and leaves. The road was empty now, no passing trucks, no mocking drivers, just the whisper of wind through the trees, like a sigh from the past. He walked to the exact place where Amara had knelt, the gravel still bearing faint traces of coolant, a mark of her quiet courage. Chris's scar warmed beneath his cuff, no longer a burn of shame but a pulse of purpose. He pulled the Polaroid from his wallet, its creased edges soft from years of handling, and studied it, himself at 19, grinning, holding Lily's hand, the ruby ring a defiant gift. He'd promised to come back, but Sunshine Children's home had vanished, and with it, his courage. Now, Amara had brought it back, her strength a mirror to the boy he'd been, the man he could still become. He knelt, pressing the Polaroid to the ground, the gravel cool against his fingers, and whispered, "I'm here, Lily. I'm here." The act was small, a private ritual, but it felt like a door closing, a weight lifting. Chris stood, the morning light catching the silver ring on his finger, its vine pattern a match to Amara's ruby, a symbol of the family he'd failed and the one he could still save. He thought of Sarah's journal, its sketch of the ring's hidden compartment, the microfilm naming Lily, Elizabeth, and a third sibling. Amara was Lily, he was sure, but Elizabeth and the third, they were out there, hidden by his father's hand, and the truth in that ring could free them or destroy them all. A distant rumble broke the silence, and Chris turned to see a familiar pickup approaching, Matthew Collins, his grease-stained hands gripping the wheel, his face etched with resolve. He parked, stepping out, his flannel shirt catching the dawn's glow. "Figured you'd be here," Matthew said, his voice low but warm, no longer wary. "Amara told me you stayed, talked, listened. That's more than most would do." Chris nodded, the Polaroid still in his hand, and Matthew's eyes softened as he saw it. "She's Lily, isn't she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," Chris said, his throat tight. "But the ring, it's more than proof. It's a weapon, and my father will come for it." Matthew's jaw tightened, but he stepped closer, his hand resting on Chris's shoulder, a gesture of trust forged in shared loss. "Then we fight," he said simply. "For her. For Sarah." The words were a vow, and Chris felt the road beneath him shift, no longer a place of dismissal but a starting point, a line drawn against the empire his father had built. They walked together to the Mustang, the morning light stretching their shadows long and thin, like ghosts of the children Sunshine had stolen. Matthew pulled a small cloth from his pocket, unwrapping a tool, a delicate pry bar, its tip fine enough to open the ring's compartment. "Amara gave me this," he said. "Said Sarah taught her how to use it, just in case." Chris's heart skipped, the weight of Sarah's foresight humbling him. He handed Matthew the locket, its vine pattern glinting, and they sat on the Mustang's hood, the road quiet around them. Matthew worked carefully, the locket's hinge yielding with a soft click, revealing a tiny compartment, empty but marked with scratches, evidence of something once hidden. "The microfilm's in Amara's ring," Chris said, his voice steady. "We need to open it, but not here. Somewhere safe." Matthew nodded, his eyes scanning the road, the memory of last night's shadow lingering. "My shop," he said. "It's got a reader, old but functional. We do this together." Chris looked at the road, the gravel where Amara had stood, and felt a release, not of guilt, but of fear. He'd come back to this place, not as the millionaire who dismissed her, but as a brother, a protector, a man choosing to stand. The Polaroid went back into his wallet, no longer a penance but a promise kept. He climbed into the Mustang, Matthew beside him, and they drove toward the shop, the dawn's light painting the world anew. As they passed the town's edge, a black sedan idled in a side lot, its windows tinted, its engine silent. Chris's scar pulsed, a warning he couldn't ignore, but he kept driving, Matthew's presence a steady anchor. The road behind them was empty, but the sedan's shadow followed, a specter of his father's reach, a reminder that the truth in Amara's ring was aflame, and Richard Reynolds would burn the world to snuff it out. Chris's hand tightened on the wheel, the locket in his pocket a quiet vow, and he knew this road, this place, had changed him. But the fight for Amara, for Lily, for the siblings he'd yet to find, was only beginning, and the cost was coming due. The morning sun climbed higher, bathing the upstate New York countryside in a golden haze, the dusty road where Amara first fixed Chris's Mustang now a distant memory, yet its echo pulsed in every mile he drove. Chris Reynolds gripped the wheel, the Mustang's engine a steady hum, Matthew Collins beside him, the pry bar and locket tucked safely in his pocket. The mechanic's shop loomed ahead, its chipped red sign a beacon of refuge, but the black sedan's shadow lingered in Chris's mind, a silent threat trailing them from the town's edge. Amara's ruby ring, with its hidden microfilm, was no longer just a promise, it was a weapon, one that could unravel his father's empire or destroy them all. The vine-etched silver ring on his finger warmed, a reminder of the family he'd failed and the one he'd chosen to fight for. They pulled into the shop's gravel lot, the air thick with oil and earth, the garage door creaking open to reveal Amara and Zeke waiting inside. Amara's curly hair was tied back, her eyes steady but bright, the ruby ring glinting on her finger like a star. Zeke stood close, his bracelet catching the light, his young face a mix of fear and resolve. "You came back," Amara said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that stopped Chris in his tracks. He nodded, stepping forward, the locket heavy in his pocket. "I told you I wouldn't run," he said, his voice firm, the Polaroid of him and Lily burning in his wallet, a vow kept after 15 years. Matthew set the pry bar on the workbench, its delicate tip gleaming under the shop's flickering bulb. "This'll open the ring," he said, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. Amara hesitated, her fingers brushing the ruby, then slid it off, placing it in Matthew's palm. The room stilled, the weight of Sarah's sacrifice, Lily's loss, and the truth they were about to uncover pressing down. Matthew worked carefully, the ring's band yielding with a soft click, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside, a sliver of microfilm gleamed, no bigger than a grain of rice, but heavy with secrets, Project Gemini, stolen siblings, Richard Reynolds' crimes. Chris's scar pulsed, his heart racing as Matthew set the microfilm into an old reader, its screen flickering to life. Names appeared, stark against the grainy light, Lily Sullivan, Elizabeth Sullivan, third subject unnamed. Beside them, dates, genetic codes, and a chilling note, contingency for Reynolds' heir. No trace. Amara's breath caught, her hand finding Zeke's, and Chris saw Lily in her eyes, the girl he'd promised to save. "You're Lily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And Elizabeth, she's out there." The third name, blank but looming, was a shadow they couldn't yet touch. Amara's gaze hardened, her voice steady. "Sarah saved me from this. Now we finish it." Matthew nodded, his eyes glistening, and Zeke squeezed her hand, his bracelet a quiet vow. Chris pulled the locket from his pocket, its vine pattern matching the ring, and opened it, the photo of the woman with Amara's eyes staring back. "This is your mother," he said, his voice soft. "I don't know her name, but my mother, Olivia, did. We'll find her, and Elizabeth, together." The words were a promise, not just to Amara, but to himself, to the boy who'd carved that vine and the man who'd learned to stand. The shop's door rattled, a sharp knock breaking the moment, and Chris's scar burned, the sedan's shadow flashing in his mind. Matthew moved to the door, his hand on a wrench, but it was Doris, the diner waitress, her face pale. "There's a car circling town," she said, her voice low. "Tinted windows, no plates. They're looking for something." Amara's hand tightened on the microfilm, and Chris knew, his father's reach had found them. He stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Get Amara and Zeke somewhere safe," he told Matthew. "I'll face him." Amara shook her head, stepping closer, the ruby ring back on her finger. "We do this together," she said, her eyes fierce, Lily's fire burning bright. Chris's throat tightened, and he nodded, the shop's light casting their shadows as one. They drove to the road where it began, the gravel crunching under the Mustang's tires, the barren trees now aglow with noon's light. Chris parked, Amara beside him, the microfilm in her pocket, the locket in his. The sedan appeared, slowing, its windows dark, but Chris stood tall, Amara's hand in his, a family forged not by blood but by choice. The car stopped, but no one emerged, its engine idling like a held breath. Chris's voice rang out, steady and clear. "You can't erase her, Father. Not anymore." The sedan's door opened, but it wasn't Richard, just a driver, his face blank, holding a phone. A voice crackled through, cold and familiar. "You're too late, Christopher. The truth dies with her." The line went dead, and the sedan sped off, leaving dust and dread in its wake. Amara's hand tightened in his, her voice a whisper. "He's wrong. The truth lives in us." Chris looked at her, the road stretching behind them, the place where she'd fixed his car now a monument to her courage. He saw Lily, Sarah, the woman in the locket, and the siblings yet to find, all tied by the vine's curl, the ring's glow. The Polaroid in his wallet felt light now, not a burden but a beacon, and he knew this road wasn't an end, but a beginning. They returned to the shop, Matthew and Zeke waiting, Doris's warning a call to move faster, to protect the microfilm, to find Elizabeth and the third. Amara slipped the ruby ring onto her finger, its red stone catching the sun, and whispered, "Family is where you choose to stay." The words lingered, a soft echo of Sarah's letter, a truth that outshone the shadows. Chris's scar no longer burned, it sang, a quiet hymn to the road, the ring, and the girl who'd brought him home. But as they planned their next step, a new shadow waited, a third name on the microfilm, whispering of a truth still hidden, ready to rise.